Hello, this is James and the Band of Fire, Chapter 6, The Classification. As the room began to light up, with the sun slowly flowing through his window, James closed the Book of Adam and placed it in his bag. He was now all packed and ready to go to camp. Helia's music softly continued in his mind, and all that he had read was brought into perfect understanding. As the music continued, he looked up at his beautiful bird, whose fire-colored feathers seemed to be getting brighter since bringing her home. He was amazed at all he had learned since Helia became his. Having not read more than the first page of the book since his birthday, he now had finished chapters 1, 3, 4, and 5, now that he had all the help from Helia. He still skipped chapter 2 because he wasn't sure how history would help him. As he carefully reviewed the new information, a smile came to his face with the thought that the camping days were finally here. Mom would be taking them momentarily to the ranger station to be transferred to the camp at Becca's parents were again gone for work. Hours later, and after boarding the car, Becca was impressed at all James had learned from his reading. But she was surprised he felt chapter 2, History of the Band of Fire, was not a chapter he felt was important. But she was happy he read chapter 4, Becoming a Titan, so that they could talk about the whole process that would be happening later that day. Becca was actually intrigued about the classification and was nervous what they would find to be her special powers. They spent the entire trip discussing this process, and the more they talked, the more James got excited to get it all started. Even Becca seemed to be talking faster and at a higher pitch as they finished the short trip in the car to the ranger station. Due to the great excitement they felt, they failed to realize what they didn't know about this day. What they didn't know and hadn't really thought about was how they would go from the ranger station to the camp, deep in the Rocky Mountains. As they unpacked their supplies, they finally noticed the green bus being loaded by other students. James was a little surprised because he couldn't understand how that bus could take them into the back country where the Book of Adam had said Campus Gaia was located. I guess I will just have to find out, he thought, while Becca smiled at him, apparently thinking the same thing. Even Helia seemed excited as she continued to sing in a soft, beautiful tune. Becca quickly stowed her bags underneath the bus and stepped in to find a seat. At that very moment, James noticed a tall, even lanky 12-year-old boy with straight, short, blonde, almost white hair with even whiter skin. His light green eyes lit up his face underneath his round glasses that rested on his long nose. His voice came out with a slow drawl that reminded James of a farmer. He looked like someone James would like to meet. Hello, I am James Adamson. Wait, what? Are you related to Simon John Adamson? Yes, he is actually my father. Wow, what a privilege to get to meet you. My name is Michael Peterson. I must say that your dad is my hero. I was so looking forward to meeting him this year, but was told by my older sister he won't be teaching this summer. He is still away on a trip. Does he usually teach at the camp? I knew he would go to camps all summer, but he never told me that he taught, James said, trying to hide the frustration in his voice. Just then, Helia's soft music stopped. As James looked at her, she was distracted by a large brown falcon in a large cage being loaded into the bus. As Michael noticed what James was looking, he smiled and said, well, that is Fenwick, my best friend. I have had him since he was an egg. James, a little startled, turned back to Michael and pointing to Helia, this here is Helia, my new friend of only a couple weeks. Michael laughed and they both boarded the bus. As James looked around for Becca, he was happy to see her seated near the middle of the bus with a midnight black 12-year-old girl with a round face, deeply set, dark brown eyes, and thick black hair reaching down the center of her back. James and Michael took the seat in front of them, and James couldn't wait to get going. The trip itself was the most unique trip James had ever taken. He had just sat down next to Michael, and before they could even turn to talk with Becca and her new friend, the bus started moving. James heard the driver close the bus door, and then time seemed to stop. His mind was slowing, almost stopping, and he felt almost like sleep moving through his body. It was as if life was paused. He could feel that something was happening, but had never had this feeling before. James fought the feeling and determined he would not fall asleep. Right now, and he stood back up and turned to look at Becca, who seemed to be almost frozen in one place. Her talking had stopped mid-sentence, which James had never heard before. With her mouth open, as if finishing the word she was saying, and most of the students on the bus were likewise frozen. The bus driver turned with a smile, and James heard him ask very rapidly, "Can you please sit back down, son?" To which James quickly obliged. Then it happened. Everything became a blur, much quicker than before. He was unable to fight this time, but it just happened. James couldn't see the bus, couldn't see the street, couldn't see the other students. Just a blur over everything around him. Helia's soft music, however, continued at a normal speed, but only in his mind. She was packed somewhere below the bus and didn't seem to mind this very rapid trip to camp. James reached out to her, a little nervous about what was happening, and her music just got louder in his mind until he relaxed once again. And once he relaxed, everything went back to normal, and the bus stopped in a large dirt parking lot somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. As James was trying to figure out what was happening, Becca's conversation started right where it left off, and everyone around him acted like they had just barely started the bus. Michael exclaimed in surprise, "Wait, how did we get here?" James didn't know what to say, so he just said nothing. But similar comments happened all around him. Becca's voice broke through the buzz of noise from the other students with her usual knowledge-filled comment. Obviously, the bus driver must be a chronopath. He must have modified time to travel as it discusses in chapter 12 of the Book of Adam. James just smiled again and made a mental note that he must ask her sometime why he had such a weird experience during that travel when apparently nobody else did. Or maybe he should just read chapter 12. Immediately upon arriving, the bus driver stepped off the bus and walked over to an older lady that seemed to be in charge. She was a relatively thin lady with long auburn hair tied up in a bun on the top of her head, with dark eyes, teardrop spectacles, and a pointy, short nose. The smile in her eyes, however, was almost infectious. They talked for a moment, and then she walked over to the bus where James and the other students were still sitting. She stepped on the bus and called everyone's attention to her. The buzz of talking and excitement died down quickly as she spoke directly to their minds and ears together. "Welcome, Titans, to Campus Gaia. I am Master Bell, and will be working closely with many of you throughout your summer here and the summers to come. Before we can allow you to join the other Titans in the Great Hall, however, it is important that you undergo the classification. There are 3 masters outside that will join me in directing you to the various tents just past the parking lot. There are 7 total tents in which you will have the opportunity to undergo the necessary procedure. Please follow the instructions very carefully. As for the process or tests you will undergo, know that you can't mess them up, nor can you trick them. Just relax, and you will succeed in helping, and we will succeed in helping you reach the best classification for you. We have been doing this for a long time, and we know what we are doing. Once you complete the process, the examiner will give you a number, and you will proceed to Camp Master McAdams' cabin for instruction on the results. Are there any questions?" James looked up at her thin, pleasant face and couldn't help but feel an interest in learning more about her. He wasn't sure if it was her telepathic influence on his mind or the fact that she was the first instructor he had met here at the camp. He did notice, however, that the music in his mind had stopped when she started to speak. He wondered where Helia was. And for each of you wondering where your animal friends are, they are with your bags and have been removed from the bus. They will be placed in the appropriate tents once you are assigned. Know that they are being well taken care of while you get classified. James smiled again, knowing she was actually answering his unasked question. Telepathy is kind of cool, but a little scary that they can so easily be in my mind. And he smiled again, knowing she probably heard that thought too. The dismissal from the bus was very orderly and seemed to proceed quickly. James was one of the last to be assigned to a tent and was directed by Master Bell to the far right tent of the 7. Becca had been sent earlier to tent 3. Michael went to tent 5, and Becca's new friend was sent to tent 1. James had read about the process and knew there would be 7 tents, with each tent having a specialized telepath assigned to put the young Titan through 2 tests. Each tent was slightly different, but the overall test produced the same ultimate results of classification, primary and secondary skills of each individual student. James had been excited for this process all morning, but as he approached tent 7, he now became very nervous. Am I really ready for this? Should I have read more? He thought as the last student before him entered the tent. As he stood there trying to calm his now pounding heart, Master Bell opened the door to the tent and invited him in. As soon as he was inside the tent, she started talking. James, the bus driver, stated, "You recognized how he was causing the bus to travel, is that correct?" I felt my mind slowing down, but was able to fight it initially, and then everything went blank. Isn't that what everyone felt? You know that everyone didn't feel that. Most of them were frozen as you looked at them. This is another one of your gifts that we will develop. I am excited to see who you are through these tests. I expect great things from you, my boy, great things. I also have a great love for your father and wish he was here with you for your first year at camp. Maybe he will still make it. Although she was hoping to help calm him down, the expectations he was setting for himself and the expectations she just expressed caused his heart to start pounding more quickly. He barely noticed the interior of the cabin tent, to include a small metal table with a blindfold and a small chair. He wasn't calm enough to sit, so he hoped she would allow him to stay standing. As you wish, James. I will let you stand, but you must place the blindfold to ensure you don't cheat with your eyes throughout the examination. She then handed him the blindfold that he promptly put in place. Once the blindfold was in place, he was whisked off to some distant area, some distant camp, or maybe just a forest. He was standing by himself and could see Becca in the distance, lying on the ground as if asleep. He didn't know where he was, couldn't see very far in front of him because of the growing darkness. He wasn't sure what was happening to Becca. He heard his mother's voice in the distance, but couldn't see her either. At that point, he began to panic even further. He didn't know what to do. I should have read more. How can I possibly even understand what needs to be done in this test? Is this real or just in my mind? How did I get here? Did I travel again as the bus traveled? I really can't do this. I don't know how. His mind continued to race. His heart seemed to be beating out of his chest. He was probably going to fail as a Titan and would not get the chance to stay at camp as he had hoped. Master Bell would have the privilege of telling Becca, and maybe even his father, that he had failed. Just then, a beautiful music, Helia's music, began to play in his mind. This was definitely in his mind and not for anyone else to hear. His rapidly beating heart, trying to beat out of his chest, began to slow as he relaxed. That music was his secret support, his help. But that was not all. Don't use your mind, for betray you it will. Let your heart free, while you silence your mind and dance the life your senses may be. Then peace and happiness you will find. Great gifts you have, but only if abilities set free you do. Helia's voice became silent as her music continued, slightly louder in his mind. James was now calm and ready to start. His senses raced into action. He took a deep breath and could feel the chill of the growing darkness. The sun must have just gone down. He heard his mother's voice in the distance, to his right. He was in a forest he had been in one other time with his parents. That means the road coming into the forest should be located behind him. It also meant the trail he was on led to a waterfall ahead. He couldn't remember the distance, but could actually hear the water ahead if he concentrated. But what worried him was the fact that Becca was lying on the trail, not speaking. In the distance ahead of him, he heard a wolf howl. No, not howl, but talk. I smell people in the forest. Why are people in my forest? She sounded dangerous, but like a mother trying to protect her pups. He knew it was imperative that he help Becca quickly. Just then, he was standing next to her. He bent down and noticed her breathing without difficulty, but her eyes were closed. He couldn't see any bleeding or any injuries at this time. As he reached down and touched her, he felt she had fallen and was unconscious from hitting her head on a rock. He examined her head and saw a small bump, but nothing more. He knew that she would soon be okay. So he called Helia, and she flew over and lifted Becca up and carried her back to camp, which he now knew was to their left, but he wasn't sure how far, maybe a half mile. The voice of his mother then came back. She was tied to a tree in the area they had eaten lunch when they came years ago to this forest. He thought of the place, and he was there standing next to the tree where she was tied. She wasn't bound with ropes. They looked more like thick metal cords. His simple pocket knife in his pocket would be insufficient. He reached out and grabbed the cords with all his strength, but even his strength was insufficient. Then he noticed black, glass-like rocks on the ground behind the tree. He grabbed some of the large rocks, obsidian, and took the handle of his pocket knife to chip the rock into sharp points. He pulled cords from one of the small bushes to his left and then wove a rope that he used to tie the now sharpened rock to the end of a long stick. He was surprised at how quickly he was able to cut the stick from the surrounding tree and shape the rock, stick, and rope into a dagger. When he was complete, it was quite an impressive weapon. To his further amazement, he was able to cut the metal cords with little or no difficulty utilizing the dagger. But as the cords gave way, his mother collapsed before him. He immediately saw her thoughts and knew she was just physically exhausted and would be unable to walk back to camp. She had been out there in the forest for about 6 hours tied to the tree, and she didn't know why. She was still very nervous about Simon, his dad, who had still not contacted her or come home. So he had one choice. He couldn't leave her here, and Helia was still busy carrying Becca. Knowing that he wasn't strong enough to break the metal cords, he decided he would need to see if he was strong enough to carry Mom. He lifted her up with one arm and was surprised his mother was not heavy at all. He started to think about taking her home instead of camp, and he was there, placing her safely back in bed, and then he knew it was time to go back. His mind cleared, and Master Bell, standing with a notebook in her hand and tears running down her face, spoke directly to his mind. I am so sorry, James, that your father is still gone. I am so sorry your mother is still so worried about him. I wish we could do more to help them both. James looked up at her in surprise and then remembered she had seen perfectly well what he had done and knew even what he thought and felt. He just wasn't sure what it all meant. Had he passed the test? Why were Becca and his mom in his test? Why did he think about Dad again? His thoughts were interrupted as Master Bell did everything she could to get her composure and then invited him to leave through the opposite door. She said nothing more, but told him that Master McAdams would give him more information. And to his surprise, she didn't give him the number she had promised on the bus. What did that mean? Did he fail to qualify for a number? As he stepped out of the door, Helia's song came back to his mind, and the calm returned throughout his entire body. What a blessing Helia is to me. Why was I so lucky to have her choose me? As he took a few steps away from the tent, the warmth and brightness of the sun drew him back to now. He noticed 7 cabin-style tents behind him, with the parking lot and 3 green buses sitting where they had been dropped off. Before him was a large wooden frame building he assumed was the Great Hall. It was about the size of a small church building and appeared to have very high ceilings. He was unable, however, to see what was happening therein, and he only saw a few students ahead of him standing in line at a table outside a separate building to the right. This building was a small log cabin with green letters on the sign over the front door that read Camp Master. On a small plaque on the door, he read the words Doc McAdams in beautiful script lettering. So he joined the line to talk with the individuals at the table. Hi, I am the senior patrol leader, Marcus Regulus, and this is my assistant, Martha Jewell. We will be helping you this summer and can answer any questions you have. Please tell us your name. James thought it interesting that this was the first time someone at the camp had asked his name, but he obliged. I am James Adamson. As he said his last name, Martha's eyes lit up, and she welcomed him with a smile. You're in the Sphinx Patrol with Master Amy Bell. I just love her. You just met her during your classification. Marcus then looked up from the list. Master Bell has given strict instructions that you meet with Doc before you are classified. Please wait here for a moment, and he will invite you into his cabin. When you are finished, please join us in the Great Hall, and we will introduce you to your mentor, Angelica Eve. Martha quickly jumped in. You will like her too. Marcus just looked at her, and they both got up and walked toward the Great Hall. As James looked around, he realized all the other students were already classified, so he just waited. He wasn't sure if this was a good or a bad omen for him, but the music in his mind continued to keep him calm. Besides, he would already be meeting Master Doc McAdams, someone that Becca was really excited to meet. James, please come in, said a voice at the door as the door to the cabin opened. He couldn't yet see the speaker, however. As he walked into the well-lit cabin, he was amazed at the simplicity of the decorations in the entry hall of this cabin. It appeared to be a 1-story cabin with 3 to 4 rooms. He was met in the entryway by an average height gentleman with what was once brown hair, now intermixed with multiple silver or white strands. He had distinct white streaks in his hair on either side of his head and was cleanly shaven with short hair. Although he was older, he had broad shoulders and a muscular build, but had a slightly plump belly. He was dressed in a brown uniform with multiple colored patches over his left breast pocket and wore a leather cowboy-style brown hat with the crest of the Band of Fire on the front. Well, my boy, you are a very unique individual. You have been classified by Master Bell as concordant. Wait, how can I be concordant? According to the Book of Adam, that means I have all the skills. I don't have the telepathy expertise of Becca. I am not even close to as talented with maps and directions as my father, and I don't even know what all the other skills even are or how they work. I tried to read about them, but I just don't understand. Becca would be a much better concordant. Doc smiled. Patience, my boy. Classification doesn't mean you are skilled at any of these skills yet. Through the classification process, your skills are augmented to see what tendencies you have. Many students will have multiple tendencies, some primary skills and some secondary skills. Some individuals arrive with well-developed primary skills, but often they are only rudimentarily developed. Very few, if any, have secondary skills developed. My job is to provide you a third test to see if this classification is correct. This third test is a very important part of this process to ensure your safety and the safety of others. James smiled, knowing that he would probably not be confirmed as concordant, as he again placed a blindfold on his eyes. His eyes opened to a large pathway that he was walking down. He saw very green trees on either side of the pathway and asphalt under his feet. He seemed to be in a very busy area, but there were no people there to be seen. To James' surprise, the Phoenix music had stopped, and Master McAdams came walking up next to him. Sorry, Helia can't help you with this one. You will need to do it on your own. At that, James started humming her music, and he began looking around. Just the thought of her music was sufficient to calm his heart and mind, as that music had done previously. He continued to look around and noticed a perfectly blue sky, with a complete absence of clouds. There was no breeze, but James could feel moisture in the air. It felt as if water was splashing towards him. As he listened, he could hear loud rushing water. He wasn't sure where they were, so he started to walk. The rushing water brought to his memory a story from his dad of one of his father's favorite places of all times. He realized where they were. They were in the cliffs of Iguazu Falls. These were a very large waterfall located. Yes, he knew exactly where they were. His mind was drawn to the picture of the globe, and he noted they were in southern Brazil, near the border with Argentina. Master McAdams smiled, but made no comments. He seemed to just be observing, not necessarily helping. James thought of his mom and realized she was safely at home, and felt her relaxed with no personal fears, no personal concerns, and just sitting at the breakfast table, finishing up her breakfast. She did have one thought, one worry, that Simon was hurt or worse, since he hadn't contacted her at all since James' birthday. James then thought of his dad and realized he was here, less than half a mile ahead of them. But he knew that Dad didn't feel safe. As he heard his father's thoughts, he realized that Dad wasn't hurt. His heart and lungs were working perfectly. He wasn't lacking water or even malnourished, and he wasn't currently tied up, but he was limited in his ability to get away. He was being held by, his mind switched from this thought almost immediately. There was a phoenix in the camp, singing a different song from Helia, but it was also beautiful. But it seemed to distract James instead of bring comfort or peace. The phoenix was talking to someone with the name of Camilla as they were making plans to train the order of. The conversation suddenly stopped, and he could tell the phoenix was blocking his participation in the conversation. He realized that the phoenix, Fogo, must be talking. He decided to try and access the other half of the conversation since Fogo wouldn't allow him to have access. He assumed Fogo must be talking to Camilla, so he reached out to talk with her, but couldn't feel her presence at all. He couldn't find her. Maybe she wasn't in the camp. Maybe it wasn't her the phoenix was talking to. He thought very carefully about the location of his dad, and then he and Master McAdams found themselves just outside a large camp, similar to Campus Gaia, but without the wooden buildings. Everything was done in tents, large cabin tents, like the tents of his initial classification, and a large pavilion that served as their great hall. He realized there were close to 30 people there in camp, with most being 15 to 18 years old. There were no students 12 years old, but there were 8 instructors, of whom he assumed Camilla was one. Based on the conversation he witnessed, she seemed to be the leader of the Order of. He still didn't know the name of the band, but it wasn't the Band of Fire. He realized that Dad would not be able to free himself or get back to Mom unless James helped him. The camp, however, would not be easy to break into, nor would it be easy to find, as it was constantly being moved. Now was his opportunity, but he needed weapons. He began to look around and noticed multiple options for preparing weapons. It was time to go save his father. Just then, he was back in the tent with a blindfold on. He felt anger well up inside him as he lost the chance to save his father. Just then he realized where he was and could still hear Master McAdams in the room. So he removed the blindfold and looked over for his classification. My dear boy, you truly are unique in your abilities. I have only once seen an individual with such great primary skills, and she's no longer a student here. She has grown too old to join our company. You are concordant and will notice unique skills develop within you over the next several years. But it is up to you how you react to these abilities. May I give you some instruction before I excuse you to join your new patrol in the Great Hall? He continued without James having a chance to respond. Bordered by Israel and Palestine on the west, and Jordan on the east, the Dead Sea is a large body of water located at the lowest elevation in the entire world. It has a very high salinity level and has been estimated to be almost 10 times as salty as the ocean. It has one main tributary in the River Jordan flowing into it. You may have heard of the Jordan River in Utah flowing south to north from Utah Lake to the Great Salt Lake, but the River Jordan is flowing north to south into the Dead Sea. There are, however, no streams or rivers coming off the Dead Sea. In fact, nothing comes from the Dead Sea. The water, once it enters the Dead Sea, is considered dead. It doesn't go anywhere, nor does it give life in any form to the borders or in the water itself. In fact, no life can flourish, not plant or animal, within or around the Dead Sea. The dead environment is the reason for the name. At the other end, the River Jordan, however, is the Sea of Galilee, or should I say, north as part of the River Jordan is the Sea of Galilee. The River Jordan is the main tributary, but also the main source of outflow from the Sea of Galilee. This river is also below sea level and is the second lowest lake in all the world behind the Dead Sea. The difference is very apparent, however, as it is a freshwater lake and gives great life within and around its banks. It is some of the most fertile land in this area of the world and has a great variety of animals and plants growth that depend on the water to live, including human civilizations. As opposed to the Dead Sea that gives no life, this water is constantly giving and helping all around it. Yes, it receives water from the River Jordan and underground springs, but it also gives life and even gives back to the River Jordan. But because of this constant giving, instead of just receiving, it also has constantly renewing water that gives even more life and growth. You have a choice to make here at Campus Gaia as you prepare to be an active part of the Band of Fire. Are you going to be the Dead Sea or the Sea of Galilee? Are you going to only receive, or are you going to give and receive? You ultimately have the choice that will determine your destiny. Other concordants have had the same choice, and we have examples in our history that have chosen each. May I invite you to learn from the Sea of Galilee. With that, without any further explanation or opportunity for question, James was excused to join the others in the great hall. He walked from the small cabin, moving very slowly as he considered what had been determined this morning. It seemed like much more than an hour had passed since he arrived at camp, but all that had happened was only the classification that took barely an hour. Apparently, they are quite efficient at administering the test to all the new students starting that day. He couldn't wait to see what had happened with Becca and Michael. That was the first moment since starting the process that he realized Becca may not be in his patrol. Hopefully at least one of them, preferably Becca, was with him in the Sphinx patrol. If he really was concordant, he would need his very best friend to help him through the process. Now he was nervous again as he came closer to the great hall and prepared to enter to see where Becca was sitting.